Welcome back to another video in our series on how to make a platform game. The scripting is fun. This is my page, and today we're going to be going to part 2 where we're going to be putting in the player sprite and get some player movement controls where he can move around and jump between platforms. So let's go right to our project and get started. Okay, so here's our project as we left it in video 1, where we had set up some simple platforms here and using the tile map and just getting some things here to play with and to start with. So first thing we need to do is get our player out here into the scene. And since I have some player animations, I'm going to go ahead and bring him in here with a default animation on him, because then Unity will set up some of the defaults for us and get the animator all set up and all that. So I'm going to go to my sprite sheet here, and I'm going to find the idle animation. There's 2 frames right here for idle, and if I want Unity to automatically make this, what I can do is I can click the first one and then control click the second one so they're both selected. You can see the 2 frames over here, and then I can just drag those out into my scene view and I can just drop them in there. When that happens, Unity realizes that there's more than 1 frame here, so it assumes that I want to do an animation, which I do. So it opens up the new animation window. So let's just call this player idle, and we will hit save on that. And then let's close down our animations here. And you see that I got a couple of new things here. I've got my player, and he has a animator attached to him already. And I also got an animation controller. Now it named it after the first sprite that I brought in. So let's rename this. This is our player. And then we can also go down here into the controller. This is the animator controller. Let's just rename that to player. And then we've got this player idle animation. Let's make a folder to put the animations in. So let's just right click in here, create folder, and we'll call this player animations. And then let's drag the animator controller to that folder and this first animation that we got. So if we go in here now, they're going to be off to the side. We're going to have several player animations here, so we want to make sure we just kind of keep them all tucked away out of the way here for us. Okay, now that we got the player here, let's also move the player to the platform sorting layer so that he doesn't get stuck back behind the background image. So now let's make sure that's important. Get him in the platform sorting sorting layer for now. And if we hit play right now, let's see what happens. Alright, and you can see the player is sitting here. He's playing his animation. It's a little bit fast, so we're going to go in and slow that animation down. But he is actually animating because I brought those 2 animations frames in. So let's go to our player and go to our animation window. If you do not see the animation window, you can go up to Window and then Animation, and it'll pop up. And I usually dock it down here at the bottom, so I've got some screen width here to play with. And you can see right now what we're doing is we're animating the player sprite, and there's 2 sprites here, and it's going pretty fast. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play with the sample rate here. Right now it's playing 12 frames per second, or 12 samples per second. I've only got 2, so let's drop this down to 6 and hit enter. And then let's hit play again and see if that's a little better rate of play for our player. Okay, that's maybe still a little bit fast for an idle, so maybe we'll take it down even as small as 4. So let's go ahead and just change it to 4, and we will try that. Okay, I think I like that a little better. So he's bouncing up and down there now with his initial animation. Now, next thing we want to do is we don't want him floating up here above the ground. So we do want to get him to where he knows when he's on the ground and he can follow the ground. There's a couple of different methods we could use for controlling gravity in this game, and a platform game is really a lot about the jumping mechanic. The way we're going to do it in this game is going to be using Unity's built-in physics system and some rigid body physics. So let's set up our player for that. So on my player, I need to add a component. So let's go here to add component, and what we want here is our rigid body, and you can just start typing in what you want. If you know what it is, it'll pop up. The rigid body 2D is what we want, and we are just going to leave all of these presets at their default. I am going to though go in and change his constraints. I want to freeze his rotation on the z-axis, because otherwise when he hits things he's going to fall over. And we don't want him to fall over. We want us to always have him standing upright. So I'm going to freeze the rotation on the z-axis so that he cannot be turned on the z by physics collisions. Okay, the other part we need here is we do need a collider for him as well. So let's zoom in on him here a little bit. There he is. And let's add another component. And this time we're just going to go into physics 2D. And capsule colliders work really well for characters because they don't have any sharp corners on them. If you do a box collider, for instance, the little sharp corners can sometimes get stuck on pieces of the ground or other types of geometry in your scene. So we're going to use a capsule collider. And then this is way too big for him right now, so we're going to go here to the size on the X, and we're just going to click there and drag until we get that drag down to about the size of his body. He's not exactly in the center of his box. We're going to offset him on the X here a little bit as well. That allows us to move this back and forth. So let's just get this kind of pulled down so that it's basically covering his body. And then it's too tall, so let's go to the Y size and drag that down. And then again, Y offset, we'll just bring that down a bit. We do want to make sure the bottom of it's where his feet are. And so maybe I need to make this just slightly bigger. Okay, that looks pretty good there. So probably about a 0.7 there for the size, about a negative 0.15 for the offset, and then we're at about a negative 0.06x offset here and a size of, let's just make it a 0.2 on the X. Okay, so I've got my collider set up. This is going to be an actual physical collider that'll keep him from passing through things. With the rigid body on here now, we also have gravity. So for now, we're going to leave gravity scale at 1, which is standard gravity. And if we hit play now, we should see him fall down till his feet hit the ground there, and then he should just stand there. So let's give it a test. Alright, and there he is. He's now standing on the ground, and gravity is affecting him. We still can't move him around or anything, but we do have him in the scene and playing his default idle animation. So let's see if we can get him to move here next. That's going to require us to get some script on him. So let's actually move him down closer to the ground. There we go. And then let's add a script to our scene here. So let's make a folder in our assets here. This is right-click assets, create folder, and let's make a scripts folder, just so we don't have our scripts out here clogging up our root asset folder. And inside of scripts then we can just right-click anywhere in here, say create C# script. Let's give it a name right away. So this is going to be the player script. And then we'll open this up in Visual Basic. Alright, here we are with our empty script to open up in Visual Studio. So first thing we want to do is get some movement control here. So we're going to need to let him move back and forth on keyboard inputs. So we're going to need to have a variable that will control his speed and so forth. We'll do that in just a second. But right now in the update function, we're going to write a command here that will move him a little bit every frame if we are on keyboard keys. Alright, so first let's make a couple of public floats. Let's make a public float here for our horizontal movement here. So we're going to do that. It's going to be a variable that's going to hold what we're getting from our inputs. And we're going to get input from the keyboard here. So we're going to set that equal to, we're going to say input, which goes into Unity's input system. And what we want to do is get an axis. An axis is a pre-built up setting in here for some keys. We'll go and take a look at that in just a second. Inside here, the axis we want is called horizontal. Now, this is one that Unity already has set by default, And you have to spell it exactly the way that it is here, otherwise it won't match up. And I'll show you the input manager here in just a second where that is. So every frame, basically, we're going to go into the input manager and we're going to find out, are we getting any input from the horizontal keys that are mapped out in Unity's input manager? If we are, then we're going to store the value, because this returns a float value between a -1 and a +1. So if we're on a left directional key, we're going to get a value that's negative up to a -1. If we're on a positive movement key, then we're going to get a value that's positive up to a +1. And if we're not pushing any of those keys, we will get a 0. So this will give us a way to control which way we should be moving. So let's save this and let's go back into Unity and take a look at the input manager. So to get to the input manager, we go to Edit, Project Settings, Input. And then here's our input manager. We just open up our input axes here, and you see the first one in the list here is titled horizontal. If I open that one up, here's its name. You'll see the buttons that it's already got set to. So this is set to the left arrow for negative button and the right arrow for positive. It's set for the A key as an alternative negative button and the D key for the alternative positive button. So this is working with arrow keys and the WASD keys for horizontal movement. So we're going to leave all these settings at default. I just wanted to show you where this was so that you could see what we're accessing. So when I go in my script and I say input, that means get into the input system. When I tell it to get an axis, it knows it's going to look up axes that are in the input list that I just showed you, and it's going to look for one that's named exactly that. And then it's going to return the value between the -1 and +1 back to me. Okay? So that gets me every frame if we're pushing keys and which ones. We can then use this -1, +1, or 0 that we're going to get back from that to control our movement. So we're going to use a command called transform.Translate. And transform.Translate will move the transform of our player in the direction and the distance of the translation. So first I'm going to give it a vector 3 direction. Now we're in a 2D game, so we can use vector 2s in here as well. And this is left-right movement. So I'm going to set this to moving right at the moment. So I'm going to say vector 2 dot right. And that will give me a vector that has a 1 in the x coordinate and a 0 in the y coordinate. So when this thing moves now, it's going to move 1 unit on the x-axis and 0 units on the y-axis. Alright, now I don't want it to do this because this would actually make him move really fast because this is 1 unit per second. So we're going to take that times time.delta time. Time.delta time is the amount of time that has passed between frames. So since update's running every frame, I want to know how much time has passed, and I want to move that fractional amount of my total movement. So right now it's 1 unit with the vector 2 right that has a 1 in it. So this would be 1 unit per second. Now that's actually really slow. So what we want to do is get control of how fast that speed actually is. So we can take that times a speed variable. So I'm going to make a variable called speed here in just a moment so that we can do that. So let's go up to the top here and let's make a public float. Let's call it speed. And then we can set that out in the inspector and we can kind of play with the numbers to see what looks good. So now what's going to happen is every frame we're going to be moving to the right at whatever speed is per second amount of speed. Now we want to also tie in our get axis here. So what we can do is we can take all of this then also times our horizontal. So again, like I told you here a little while ago, this is either going to be a -1, a +1, or a 0. So if this is a 0, well, these are all multiplications. So if I multiply all these and then I multiply that by a 0, I'm going to get 0, which means I will have 0 translation. I'll move not at all. I'll move 0. If I get a -1 in here, now I'm going to be moving left, because vector 2 right is moving the character right. Well, if I reverse that by making a negative, he's going to go left. If I have a +1 in here, well, then everything is positive, so I'll be moving to the right. So let's save this. Let's go back into Unity here. Let's give this script to our player. So here's our player. Let's grab the script here and just drag and drop it down in his list of components. And let's go ahead and make sure we give him a speed. So let's start with like maybe a 5. That's probably too fast, but we'll give it a try. So now if I hit play, I should be able to move him left and right with the arrow keys. So we'll test it out. Okay, I'm not pressing any keys. Now he's standing still. If I push the right arrow key, there he goes. He moves right. When I stop pushing it, he stops. If I push left, he moves left. Now you can see that that looks a little fast. And I'm looking in the game view there as well. And looks like he's running pretty quick there. So let's slow that down a bit. So one of the cool things about public variables is, as we're going through here, we can tweak these. So let's say I put it down to a 3 and click back in my game window. Now I can see what a 3 looks like. I'm thinking 3 might still be a little bit too fast. Let's try a 2.5. And let's see what that looks like. Alright, let's stick with that for now. A 2 or a 2.5 is what I'm going to do. So now I have him moving backwards and forwards. Alright, now of course he's playing his idle animation all the time right now. We're going to handle animations in another video. For now we're just going to let him keep bobbing up and down, and we'll kind of see how that goes. Alright, next let's add in some jumping. We're going to use the built-in rigid body 2 physics with gravity and with jumping. So what we're going to do is go back into our script, and we're going to put in another key that we're going to listen for here. So for right now, we're going to make the spacebar key our jump key. That seems to be pretty standard in a platform game. So if I'm checking for a key instead of a set of keys, like a getAxis is checking me an axis. So there has to be a positive and a negative direction of movement. It's a directional kind of a check. This is just going to be a single press. So I'm going to ask that in a conditional statement. I'm going to say if, again, we're going to go into the input, and we're going to use a getButtondown command. What getButtondown does is it will pay attention for the button that we tell it to pay attention to, and as soon as that button is pushed, it'll do something, but it'll do it just the frame that it's pushed. So it's just going to do the one jump per push. So I have to tell it here which key I want it to look for, and I'm going to put jump in here. And again, this is going to go into Unity's input manager, and it's going to look for something called jump. So let me put in some brackets here. Let's save this. Let's go take a look in the input manager again, just so you can see what's happening. So again, we go to Edit, Project Settings, Inputs, and you see there's another one here, right here, called Jump with a capital J, and that is set to the spacebar. Now, if I wanted to add another jump key, I could do that in the alternative positive button slot here, or I could change this to any key I wanted to. But right now, I'm just going to leave it for the spacebar. So that's already set up for jumping for spacebar. So let's go back to Visual Studio. So that's what's happening. If I push the jump button right now is the spacebar. If I push the spacebar, I want to jump. Now to jump, I want to apply a force on my rigid body. I want to put an upward force on this rigid body that'll push him up into the air. So before I can do that, I have to have a reference to the rigid body of our player here. So that means I need a variable up here at the top. So I'm going to make a rigid body 2D variable, and I'm just going to call it RB2D. Okay? Not to be confused with a very famous robot. Alright, RB2D is going to be the variable name that's rigid body 2D. Okay, I'm also going to need to tell it how much force to push it with, so let's go ahead and make a public float that we can call our jump force, and then we can play with that out in the inspector and try different values without having to keep coming back in the script and hard code numbers. Alright, so we got a jump force and we got our RB2D. Now, we need to actually fill this in, so I'm going to do that right here in the start function. So when this script first starts up, I'm going to have it go out and get the component, the rigid body 2D component. So I'm going to say RB2D equals, and I'm going to use my get component, and the component I want is a rigid body 2D. So that's how you type that in. The get component will go out and find the component of the type that I put in the angle brackets there that's attached to the same object as the script. So since there's only one rigid body 2D on our player, this will work just fine. It'll go out and it'll search through, find that rigid body 2D component, and then we will store it right here in this rigid body 2D variable. Alright, so that will get us hooked up. And then down here now, when we go to jump, we can say RB2D, okay, that's our rigid body, dot, and we can use what's called an AddForce. And let's go ahead and do AddRelativeForce. And the force we want to add, and we got to give it a vector 2. So let's give it vector 2 dot up. Vector 2 dot up has a 0 in the x amount and a positive 1 in the y amount. So that'll cause me to be pushed up on the x-axis. Now a 1 isn't really going to be enough force to make me move, so this is where I take this times the jump force. So now I've got this set up. If I push the space bar, the jump button, then it's going to do this, where it's going to add that force and it's going to make me go up. So let's save this and go test it out in Unity. So let's go to our player and find the script here. Let's give him a jump force. Let's try 200, and then let's hit play, and let's just see what happens when I hit my space bar. So I'm hitting the space bar now, and there he is. He jumped a little bit. So that's not very much jumping. You notice when he jumps, after that force is overcome by gravity, he gets pulled back down. So it looks pretty good. Let's try a 300 over here. Click back in the game view, and let's try jumping again. There we go. So now he's jumping a little bit higher. So now I can move and jump. Now the problem I'm going to have is if I tap, every time I tap the jump button, he jumps again. So right now I've got like forever jumping turned on. Okay, so we don't want that. We'll have to fix that in a minute. But if I look over here in my game view, let's make this a little bigger, and I run over here, do I have enough jump to get up there? Nope, and I actually fell down behind that bottom part of the collider there, so we got to be careful of that. But yeah, I can just fly all over the place right now. But I can't jump high enough to get to that platform. So let's say that's the highest jump we want to go. Then we want to play with our jump force till we can get there. So maybe a 400. That looks like it might get me there. Yep. Okay, so, and you know, we might play with this some more later. But now we have him moving and jumping. Let's see if we can fix this double jump issue where I can jump when I'm still off the ground here, because that usually in a platform game kind of breaks your game. So let's go back in and add a little fix for that in Visual Studio. So now this right now says anytime I push the jump button, go ahead and jump. I actually want to know if I'm already jumping or if I'm already in the air. So there's a couple of ways to do this as well. And I'm going to just use a method right now where we check to see if we have any movement on the y-axis right now. So if we're moving up or we're moving down on the y-axis, then we don't want to jump again. We don't want to jump when we're not moving up or down. So I can do that by adding an AND here. So two ampersands together, that means AND. So we need to have the jump button pushed down, and we're going to check to see if RB2D here dot velocity. So velocity is going to get me a vector 2. And of that vector 2, I want to check the y amount on that vector. Okay. And now this will tell me how much velocity I have on the y. And if that velocity is already got one there, if it's greater than, let's say, a small number like 0.1, we might want to make that smaller, then we don't want to jump, right? So we want to make sure actually this is less than that 0.1. Now this doesn't take care of negative movement, okay? So if I was to test this right now, let's actually go ahead and see if this works here for the vertical one. So I'm going to save it. Let's go ahead and take this just one step at a time so you can kind of see what this does. So now, as long as I'm moving up, I shouldn't be able to double jump. So let's see if I can double jump. See, I can't double jump if I'm already in the air, I can't jump again. And of course I forgot to save my jump force. Once you go to play mode, you lose whatever you did here. So I think I had about a 300 in here, maybe 400, but we'll put it back to 300 here. Okay, so if I jump up, I'm going to tap my button a few times. See, he didn't start jumping again until he started falling down. So I've got the positive direction of movement where he can't jump if he's moving positive. Now, we can do a real simple thing here to catch negative as well, and that is, if we just find out what we don't really care about if it's positive or negative movement here, we're just looking for values greater than that 0.1. So what I can do is I can just get the absolute value of this velocity, and then it won't matter if it's a negative number, I'll still get a positive result, because absolute value gives me a positive number all the time. So we can use Unity's built-in function for that. We just say mathf.abs, and then we just enclose the part that we're doing absolute value for like this. There we go, it's lowercase f there on mathf, sorry about that. So if mathf.abs, so if the absolute value of this y amount of the vector 2 is a float number, so it's going to be a number, so we can get the absolute value of it. So now, if we're moving down at a negative, it'll just take the negative sign off. So now basically, it doesn't matter, any movement up or down will keep me from being able to jump again. So let's save it, and let's test it and see if we have it working for both up and down now. Alright, now I should never be able to double jump, so let's just see. Alright, notice I'm going to push my spacebar constantly as I'm jumping here. Okay, now you do notice that there was one time if I hit it just right, that I must have hit it when it was right about 0. See, I occasionally do it if I'm tapping all the time. So we could try to narrow down that gap a little bit by going in here and making this a 0.01, but if we make this too small, then sometimes if we're going up or down any kind of an inclined platform, then it won't allow us to jump. So we kind of got to find the sweet spot here, but let's try it at a 0.01, and that should be even almost impossible for me to do. We'll see if I can. So there, now I'm tapping all the time, and I'm not really ever getting a double jump. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got some movement, we've got some jumping. Currently we can control ourselves in the air as we're jumping. We could make it so that when we're jumping we can't have any air control. That's kind of up to you on your game. I'll show you how to do it here and you can decide what you want to do. I kind of like having air control because I'm just not really that good at these games here, they're really particular. I also look like I need to turn my speed down again. Remember I said about a 2.5 and I did that in play mode. So let's change it outside of play mode here now and see how that feels. That feels a little better. So now I can move and I can jump, and I cannot double jump. Alright, let me show you real quick how you can turn your air control off so you can't change direction when you're in the air. Some people like that. So what we can do here is, if we're in the air, we can make sure that we just ignore getting this horizontal input. So we can ignore those keys if we're in the air. So for that to happen, we're going to have a check. When we jump, we would have to set that to probably a Boolean that won't allow us, or we could use the same thing we're doing right here. If we have any vertical or horizontal movement here, we could actually use that as well. Alright, so let's do it like this. We'll get our input, and then let's just check to see if we have any up or down movement. So I'm just going to copy this condition here, and let's just make an if statement right here, and I pasted it in there. So I'm going to say if the absolute value of my y velocity on the rigid body is less than this -1, let's say if it's greater than that. Okay, so if it's greater than that, if we are moving, then I just want to change my horizontal to 0. And that's a float, so we'll put an F there. So basically, if we are in the air, I'm going to zero out my horizontal input, which means that I'll no longer be able to control left or right with my transform.Translate line. So let's just test this out, see if it works the way I think it should. And then that would be one way, real easy way, you could just disable being able to change your direction in the air. So let's try it here a little bit. Okay, so I'm moving back and forth. If I jump, I can't move back or forth till I hit the ground. So now the problem is, as soon as I jump, see how it's killing my forward momentum? So we want to maybe not zero it out. Let's go back in and try something else here. So I don't necessarily want to zero it back out. Let's change it to where we only get the input if we are not moving. So maybe that'll be a better way. So let's say less than, and then let's just move this guy right here and here, paste. Okay, so now it shouldn't override it with a 0 ever, but it should not read it unless we don't have any up or down. So if we don't have any up or down, it should just keep horizontal with whatever its last value was. Let's see if that gives us any kind of quirky behavior. Let's give it a try here. Whoops, I got an error. What did I do? Okay, because I put this float, this variable here, into a set of brackets, it's only known inside of that set of brackets. So we're going to have to just do this. We're going to copy this. So we're going to declare this up here. Just make the memory declaration. And then down here, we'll just use it because horizontal here is only known inside the curly brackets that it's been declared in. So since it's been declared right here underneath the update, it'll be known all the way down to the bottom here of the update. So everywhere an update will now know what horizontal is. We're just going to assign it here only if our velocity on the y is less than the 0.01. So let's save that. Let's see what kind of behavior we get here now. Clear my error out here. What is it telling me now? Alright, so let's go ahead and actually make horizontal here a variable at the top. Since we're going to be using it here and it's giving me some trouble, let's just paste it up here. It doesn't have to be public, but let's just make it a script level variable horizontal. And when it's set up, let's just set it equal to 0. So it's got a value. And then down here, we're not going to override that 0 unless we don't have any y velocity, in which point we'll get it. And if we do have y velocity, we'll stop updating it and it'll just have whatever it last had in it. Let's save it and see if Unity likes it like this. There we go, error gone. Let's see what kind of feel we have with this now. So when I jump now, there we go, I can still keep moving in the direction I'm going, but I cannot control my direction once I'm up in the air. So I'm jumping and trying to go left or right, and it doesn't work. So you can decide if you want air control or not. I tend to like to have air control because it's a little easier to make those jumps, but that's a feature that you can turn on or off. So I'm going to just make a note here. Let's just put a comment here. This is for air control. If you want to do it that way. If you don't want air control, then you would just copy, paste. Okay. Then you would just put this up here like this. So actually we should call this air control. So I can control myself in the air. Here would be no air control if we do it this way. Okay? So air control just gets your input every frame, and that with jumping or not, you can always move left or right. If you don't want that, then do your check here to see if we're moving up or down on the y-axis. If we are not, then get your input. If you are, then you won't get your input, and then you won't be able to control yourself in the air. Transform.Translate is going to move us. We'll make a few comments here. I'm going to go ahead and block comment this out. So /*, and at the end, */. And then this will now not work, so my no air control is disabled. I've got air control here. And then this line here moves player left and right with the arrow keys and a D key. Okay, that's what that does. This line here, press spacebar, makes player jump. Alright, and then we can say only if he is not already jumping. That's what that line does there. And this one right here, this is add a force on the y-axis to make the player jump. Okay, always good to comment out our code here, especially when we're learning. So that's basically what is going on here. So I think that fulfills what we were going to do in this video. Let's go back into Unity here and take a look at what we've got done so far. And today we wanted to get the player moving and jumping using the keyboard keys. So we're going to play, and we can make him move left and right, and we can make him jump. And right now he's not jumping high enough to make that platform, but if I made his jump force a little higher, we could do that. So he's jumping all around and happy as can be because, you know, in a platformer game, the character just wants to jump. So there you go. So we learned a lot today on how to move and jump and handle not double jumping into the scene. In the next video, we'll start tackling the camera control. So we are going to using these new camera controls that are in here, which are really great. I'll show you how to do that so the camera will automatically follow the player around and not go off the outside of our background screen. And that'll be what we handle next. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you find these useful and instructional, and have yourself a great day.